started and make sure that our speakers have time today. But thank you all for joining. We are really excited to kick off our Northwest Envirothon trainings, meet the professionals. And my name's Rosie. I'm an education and event specialist at the King Conservation District. And I'm also part of the Washington State Envirothon Committee. So I'm one of the folks who's helping to plan the Northwest Envirothon regional competition. So thank you for joining us again. And for those of you who are participating in Envirothon this year, our current issue topic is waste to resources. So we are really excited to have Carolyn Bowie from the Solid Waste Management Program with the Washington State Department of Ecology and Joel Kolstead with WM to join us today and share their expertise and experiences. And just in case, I think a lot of us are registered for Envirothon already, but if you're not and you're interested and want to know more, Envirothon is an annual environmental science competition for high school students that's organized by Washington Conservation Districts. So you can build a team of up to 5 high school students and have one adult advisor. So schools can have more than one team. Just let me know if you're interested in doing that. And the competition has 2 main elements. There's a test for each test subject. So that would be aquatic ecology, forestry, soils and land use, and forestry. And there's an oral presentation. And the oral presentation is going to be on waste to resources. So we will email out a scenario to everyone in each team 2 weeks ahead of the competition. And you and your team will prepare a 10-minute presentation that you'll give at the competition, and there'll be a couple judges there to score your presentation. So if you're interested in learning more or you have questions, feel free to email me. I'll drop my email in the chat as well. I'm here to help to support you and your team. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Carolyn and she can get us started.
Hello, good afternoon. I am sharing my screen. Okay, looks like we're up and running. Thank you, Rosie. It's really, let's see, I'm doing this. Well, all right. Thank you, Rosie, and good afternoon, everyone. We're really glad that you're here and excited to dive into the solid waste world with you. As Rosie explained, I'm Carolyn Bowie, joined today by Joel Kolstead, and I'll dive in first to an overview of how I got here to work at the Washington State Department of Ecology. Oh, but before we begin, we have a roundtable question for the group, which is, what excites you most about waste reduction or recycling? We would love to hear this answer to your question and give you 10 seconds to think about it. So I would love to hear from you. Why are you excited about this? What ignites you? You're welcome to share your thoughts in the Zoom chat or unmute yourself and say something. It'd be awesome to hear from everyone, or as many as are comfortable. Oh, here we go. Lowering my carbon footprint, taking care of the earth. Yeah, thank you, Nina. And Sue said that there's a lot of room for improvement. Catherine says, I'm terrified of a world with more plastic than fish in the ocean. I'm also terrified of that. Yeah.
All good. All great responses.
Zoe says, so that I can grow up on a planet that is healthy and not barren. Yeah, absolutely. And to all of these fears and motivations to be interested in recycling, yes, recycling is one of so many avenues to address these really heavy environmental issues. And yeah, you continue to think about that, and hopefully today's presentation will ignite more interest and excitement, or even solutions to think about these big challenges. So now I'll share how I got here. I grew up in Bellevue, and from a really young age, probably like many of you, I was really inspired by environmental issues. So I went to study environmental science at Western Washington University, where I got involved in Students for Sustainable Water. This is me holding up a righteous bottled water staff and campaigning against the sale and distribution of bottled water. So I started as an advocate. And then after graduating, or then while I was at Western too, I was immersed in the world of utilities and recycling as an intern for the City of Bellevue Utilities Department. I did a lot of education and outreach to residents at the time, and just got a really eye-opening and mind-blowing view into the world of recycling. So this is me at my very first material recovery facility tour in 2012, young and enthusiastic. Next, I took a professional meander as an ecologist. My love and my drive will always be for ecosystems and these gorgeous forests that we have in the Pacific Northwest. So I really enjoyed my time, both as an AmeriCorps volunteer and also working as a field technician to study the plants and soils in the Pacific Northwest and in Nevada and California. I worked for the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, and really loved that time, although I was really driven to actually take a bigger leap in my career and try to address policies and programs to shape our behavior and improve the make a difference for environmental challenges that we're facing. So I went back to school and got a master's of public administration from the University of Washington. And while I was there, I went back to the city of Bellevue, where I was an intern yet again. This is a picture of me doing a garbage truck survey in Bellevue in 2018. And after graduating, I worked as a consultant for a couple of different organizations. I did a waste characterization study for a consulting firm where we dove into recycling bins and pulled out the contents to understand what people were throwing away and how much of that was garbage, how much of that was recyclable. And I also worked as a recycling outreach specialist, working with businesses in King County to improve their recycling and composting programs. So that pathway in solid waste really gave me a great foundation to my current position at the Washington State Department of Ecology, where I work as a regional planner and grant manager. And what that means is that on a day-to-day basis, I'm working with cities and counties to support their planning for their solid waste systems. Each county has a solid waste management plan. So I support them to draft that. They have to revise it every 6 years. And then I also support cities and counties with grant funding that they receive from the Department of Ecology to support their local recycling programs. So I love my job. I love the great variety that I get to see from the state level at Ecology. I think in a state-based way, I think in a regional way, and it's really exciting to see the latest and greatest innovative ideas that our local partners are coming up with. I specialize in the Northwest region. That's where most of my work lives. So today I will be sharing a big picture overview of where our waste goes in Washington and what we're thinking about to improve this system. As it turns out, this concept of away means different end places for different discarded materials. Waste is getting buried into the earth. It's also getting made into soil. And it's sometimes getting shipped around the world or manufactured into other things. And of course, I'm talking about garbage, compost, and recycling. So to jump into garbage, as one does, as you're probably familiar, garbage is collected off of our streets out of bins or dumpsters, collected in trucks, and those trucks go to transfer stations where the garbage is dumped out, consolidated, packed onto different trucks or trains, and then it's hauled to landfills across the state. So each county has their own designation of a handful of landfills across the state. And Ecology has this terrific website where you can click on different counties and see where your garbage goes to rest. In King County, these are a couple of screenshots I took from this webpage. In King County, we can see that about 1.2 million tons of garbage are produced annually. And that garbage is most often transported to Cedar Hills landfill, which is just outside of Issaquah, Washington. So that's actually a fairly short distance. In Snohomish County, they often generate about 500,000 tons of garbage a year. And that garbage is especially shipped onto trains. And if you can see my mouse, maybe you can't see my mouse. Wait, can you see my mouse now? Okay, awesome. So it travels from Snohomish County up here and down south before the trains take an eastward turn out to Klickitat County to the Roosevelt Regional Landfill. And to me, like, it is breathtaking to consider the amount of garbage and the miles that this garbage travels. That journey from Snohomish County down to Roosevelt Regional Landfill is about 300 miles, and that happens every single day. Here's a look at what the Roosevelt Regional Landfill actually looks like. And again, I am so impressed by the scale of this. This landfill is huge. I want to say it's about 98,000 acres. I might be, okay, I'm pulling that number, but it's a really large landfill. And at a distance, you may or may not be able to tell that these are bulldozers, full-size bulldozers that are shifting the garbage around on the ground and shipping containers, dumping these train load shipments of garbage out into the landfill. So the garbage is covered up and goes there to rest indefinitely. Compost is collected in a very similar way, but compost is in fact transported and processed on a really local level for most of it. Here we have an aerial view of Cedar Grove composting in Everett. This is where quite a lot of the compost goes from King County and the Snohomish County areas. And when compost arrives at this facility, it's dumped out into this large warehouse space. It's cleaned up a little bit. It's best to put only yard debris and food waste into your compost bins, but they can remove nails with a magnet. From there, it's dumped into these really large piles that are actually covered with a material to prevent blowaway. And then from the time that Cedar Grove receives raw material from your cart that you set out on the curb, it takes about 6 weeks from that raw material to become what we know as this beautiful, rich compost. So again, compost is a cool waste stream, because it's very local and it's actually a pretty simple and straightforward process to go from the raw material into a new product. Recycling, on the other hand, is rather complex. And for recycling, Joel will dive into the awesome and complicated process that happens at a material recovery facility to sort materials. For now, I'll jump ahead to the end result of the sorting process, which is the large bales of materials that come out the other side. So this is what the bales of cardboard look like, for example, aluminum and various plastics. So the destination where recyclables are sent really depends on how the recycling processors are able to transform them from discarded material into something new. Most of our recyclables are sent to processors in the Pacific Northwest, including up into Canada and out across the ocean to Southeast Asia. So imagine for a moment the list of things that you can place in your recycling bin at home. It's a long list. Now think about how every one of those items has multiple ways that it can be recycled into something new. We'll dig into cardboard as one example. Cardboard is, when it's recycled, it's torn apart, liquid is added, it's made into this mushy pulp mixture, and then it's dried out and formed into new cardboard boxes, paper bags, newspaper, and paper towels. So these new products now have some percentage of recycled content material. And as you probably know, cardboard, paper are pretty classic recycling staples. Other materials can get a little more complicated. But at the end of the day, and there's the big picture recycling system flow really relies on well-sorted, clean materials. It then relies on industries to efficiently create something new out of those materials. And then lastly, a demand for that new recycled commodity. This flow, despite all of it's got a lot of complicated moving parts, but that's kind of a big picture take of it. So how are we working towards better recycling and waste reduction? One of the main responsibilities that the Department of Ecology has is implementing environmental policies passed by Washington's elected officials. And as it happens, right now is one of the most exciting times for transformative recycling policies in Washington state and around the country. One of these very exciting policies that went into effect last October was the statewide plastic bag ban. So as you may know, this law prohibits businesses like grocery stores and restaurants from distributing traditional thin plastic bags to customers. And I want to break down the intention of this law because it all goes back to reduce, reuse, recycle. Because these bags are not being purchased and distributed because of this law, this is effectively reducing the environmental cost of producing and disposing of this item. Another element of this law is that businesses are required to charge an 8-cent fee to customers who want a paper or thick plastic bag. So the fee incentivizes people to reuse bags from home. Another part of this law is the requirement that paper and plastic bags provided are required to contain a minimum recycled content, which actually helps to further the recycling process. As you can see in this little infographic, that this bag has to have a 40% recycled content and the plastic has to be made with 20% recycled content at a minimum. Then beyond the statewide plastic bag ban, I want to highlight this other really multifaceted bill that was passed in 2021. The Senate Bill 5022 was spearheaded by Senator Mona Doss and Representative Liz Berry. And as you can see, there are 4 elements of this policy aimed at increasing recycling and reducing waste. One in this, here I got my mouse back, in this lower left-hand corner, the expanded polystyrene ban prohibits businesses from distributing many types of styrofoam, which is a challenging material to recycle and often goes to the landfills. 2, up here over the peninsula, we have a servicer upon request law, which was implemented actually just 2 months ago in January, which requires businesses to give utensils to customers only upon request, thus reducing waste from unwanted utensils being handed out. Number 3, promoting more efficient recycling by removing the confusing logo requirement. As you may or may not know, just because an item has that recycle symbol doesn't mean it's recyclable. So this law addresses that. And then finally, in the lower right corner, the minimum recycled content part of this law requires that plastic containers have a minimum recycled content. Again, encouraging a better, more robust recycling system that has an end market. I encourage you to check out the legislative website. It's a bit to dig into, but if you want to explore the latest bills that are being discussed in Washington's legislature right now, yeah, definitely think about checking it out. And I also want to express that policies like the ones I went over begin with Washingtonians like you who have a great idea, and then you share that idea with others. And then you might encourage your elected officials, elected officials to advocate for that idea. And then hope that the bill passes through the state Senate, House of Representatives, and past the governor's desk to become law. It's a bit of a quick overview of how these laws come about. So onwards, collaboration is really key. There are many people working on recycling in the solid waste industry who are regularly updating the system, addressing challenges like contamination, updating laws that don't make sense anymore, and implementing new ones, as well as supporting new recycling markets that find innovative and efficient ways to recycle and reduce. And that's where you come in, Envirothon. I'm excited for you all to apply your minds and future thinking to these issues. We're constantly sharing ideas statewide and nationwide to try to do better and improve this industry. And we're also constantly educating people, especially because there is so much change in the recycling world. So lastly, I want to leave you with this reminder, a note that I personally find quite hopeful, which is that the systems we are using are relatively new. So the challenges we are facing are also relatively young. And what I mean by this is that the first curbside recycling program in the United States started around 1980. That was only 40 years ago. We've seen so much change happen in this time, and there's a lot of change ahead. So think about that. You're a part of the change, and I'm excited you're here. And with that, I'll pass the baton to Joel. Thank you. Oh, here we go.
Thank you, Carolyn. Give me just a moment and I'll get my screen going as well. Okay, can you all see my screen? Yes, perfect. Good news there. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. That was fantastic, and always good to learn more about what's happening to our materials, and that away isn't really away. It's always a tough one to get. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be able to talk with you all today. My name is Joel Kolstad. I work for WM, and we'll be talking today primarily about recyclables, both how they are processed, as well as the education side of recycling and how we can go about changing behaviors when we're educating. I'll have a few slides that we'll go through pretty quickly now to give also a quick overview for how I ended up where I'm at. And a big part of that for me and how I ended up in an environmental field was the big contrast between where I grew up and where I went to school. I grew up in a tiny town called Loon Lake in eastern Washington. It's a little bit north of Spokane. And while it's very beautiful, I loved the area, we'll just say that a lot of the area wasn't the most environmentally conscious. And even for recycling, my parents would have to drive recyclables 30 miles to a drop-off station. So there were definitely some different barriers there compared to, say, living in Seattle. And that was all I knew growing up. So it was a really big transition to go to Seattle and University of Washington and see how much more that related to sustainability was really out there and how many options there were. From the recycling signs that I first saw that didn't make any sense to me at the time. I mean, how could everything be going into one bin? That was very new to me. And to the containers and just the general mindset of sustainability being so much more front and center for so many people, both on campus and off. That was startling to see how much room we had to improve where I grew up and how many opportunities there were. And once I got into the industry further, learning how much more sustainability wise we could do in the Seattle area and Western Washington as well, which pushed me into an environmental major and focus. The summer before my senior year, I had an internship with WM, which was very eye-opening. It mostly focused on educating the public, multifamily residents and businesses about recycling, doing a lot of technical assistance, and getting my hands dirty in some waste sorting and audits as well. I hadn't at all planned to be in a garbage or recycling related field, but after a while found that it just became a big focus of mine, and the clock that's in the upper right of the screen became pretty accurate as I found myself focusing on recycling all of the time, which is interesting when you start noticing garbage trucks everywhere you go that you never noticed before in your life. That led to a full-time position at WM as an education and outreach coordinator, where I conducted tours of the recycling center. I gave lots of presentations and developed programs with cities in both the Puget Sound and Oregon to help out with the recycling programs. I had started off planning to be in an education field when I first entered college, and this was actually a great way to combine the two, where I was able to work on sustainability programs in a hands-on education capacity. I also got involved with the WSRA, the Washington State Recycling Association, which was a great introduction to more people and roles in the industry. And I will just give a brief plug if you are at all interested in the recycling and waste field. It's a great way to find out what's more beyond just this presentation of what's out there. So to wrap up the introduction, where I'm now, the past 5 years, I've managed different recycling programs with King, Snohomish, and Spokane counties, where I work with the counties to develop innovative studies and programs to help recycling practices in the community. An example of one really fun multicultural art and poetry campaign is in the images on the right. And the programs in general can vary a lot, which is what keeps things fresh and exciting and helps keep our industry moving forward and having us come up with new ideas, aside from just mailing out the same recycling flyers and hope that everyone does the right thing. I also joined the WSRA board, which I mentioned the organization last slide a few years back, and I've been president for the past 2, which has again been a great way to connect with more people and learn more about the recycling and waste industry and some of the opportunities that exist in the industry that I had no idea about a few years ago, which is something we'll touch on a little bit further on. So diving into recycling, Carolyn talks some about the general waste streams and what goes where, and I'll focus more on the technical aspects of recycling and how sorting happens beyond the curb. And kind of going back to that, there is no such thing as a way. Everything goes somewhere. It's just what happens with it. We'll go through some of this pretty quickly, but I wanted to at least give a snapshot overview. The majority of recycling in Washington is put into one bin, which is where that sign that confused me when I first started at Washington at UW comes from. So it's commingled or single stream. It all goes together. That makes it a lot easier when you're at home or at work, but it then needs to be sorted back out again. For that sorting, recyclables go to a MRF, or material recovery facility. I know Carolyn mentioned it, but it's tough to remember. So material recovery facility. WM has 3 in the state, and I believe there are 7 or 8 in total. And these MRFs use a combination of hand sorting that is done by people and automated sorting to separate out all of the different materials so that they can go to end markets to be made into those new things. We'll walk through the steps of the sorting process with a series of pretty quick video clips. This won't be quite the same as an in-person tour, but you get saved a lot of loud noise and some fun smells, so it really works out all right. First, I know Carolyn can relate to, yeah, lots of good smells. First, we have the tip floor, which is a massive pile that accumulates every single day. Sorting facilities can process between 500 and 1,200 tons of material each day, so it's a massive amount of material, and that gets transferred from where the trucks dump the material to where it ends up on a belt to then start the sorting process. The next step is the pre-sort, where hand sorters pull off obvious garbage and contamination, things that shouldn't be in the recycling, like hoses, diapers, holiday lights, ski boots, plastic bags, and more. It's really anything you can imagine going into the recycling or going into the garbage can end up in the recycling, so they sort out all sorts of stuff. Cardboard and paper is sorted by spinning discs. It's an automatic process. The two-dimensional paper and cardboard essentially surfs like a surfer over the top of those spinning discs, while the three-dimensional bottles and cans fall through to conveyor belts below, and then they get sorted later on. A magnet pulls out magnetic metals like anything that's tin, so mainly soup cans, tuna fish cans, and those types of things. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can see the cans getting picked up and then lifted over a barrier into another area there. That's a pretty straightforward one, but always fun to watch. And something that's become much more prevalent in these facilities the last couple of years, especially, is something called an optical sorter. This unfortunately isn't a great visual because it's difficult to show what's happening where it's happening. It's more the after effects of the sorting. But an optical sorter essentially can be programmed to sort just about anything. It could sort different colors of paper or glass, or in this case, it's looking for just plastic water bottles. So the optical sorter is essentially a laser eye that scans everything that's coming along a conveyor belt, and then it uses a puff of air, and the puff just literally sounds like and these air blasts shoot up along the belt. And in this case, when it sees a plastic bottle, it'll shoot that plastic bottle up into a different area, and everything else just falls down. So it's pretty cool. They're becoming a lot more common. And like I said, you could use them to do anything. In this case, that is just number one PET plastic bottles, but they use them for different types of paper, different types of plastics, and all sorts of stuff. In this case, in the facility currently, other types of plastic, such as milk jugs and laundry detergent jugs, are sorted out by hand. And like I mentioned, they can use optical sorters for that as well. But glass is also another one that's very hard to show the actual process of because most of it happens inside of a closed container. The glass is all crushed, and then it's brought through these little tiny filters that the broken glass falls through. And then the glass is vacuumed. So you try to get as many of the other small items that went through those same small filters, such as shredded paper or bottle caps, and you try to get that out of the glass to get it as clean as possible. And quality control is also a huge thing as well. This takes place with hand sorters who check everything moving along a belt to ensure that the right things were all sorted out. So in this case, on the right, you'd see this is just mixed paper. It should have mixed paper. So if there's cardboard or there's somehow a plastic bottle that made it through, the sorter would put that item into the right bin. So it ends up in the right bale and we don't have things getting mixed up. And Carolyn showed some much prettier bales in this image, but lastly, once everything is sorted, a baler compresses essentially a big cube of that sort of material. So whether that's cardboard or plastic bottles or aluminum, they all get compressed into these big bales that weigh essentially 1,500 to 2,500 pounds, depending on what they are. So they're very big and very heavy. They're then loaded onto those trucks or trains and ships to be sent to end markets where they can be turned into new products and then hopefully purchased again. The only thing that's not baled is glass. It's loaded on the big containers just because you can imagine glass doesn't compress together very nicely. So if all of that is happening, why does it matter what sorting takes place at home? Well, there are two main reasons. The first, when it comes to just recycling, is contamination. Contamination is basically anything that goes into the recycling bin that shouldn't be there, like plastic bags, food. I mentioned diapers earlier and that sort of thing. It can be pretty gross at times, but you really want to keep just recyclables in the bin. And plastic bags especially, although they're not nearly as disgusting as diapers, they cause lots of issues where sorting facilities have to be cut or shut down 3 to 7 times per day to have those plastic bags shut out. So you're talking about literally hours of someone who, in that scenario for that photo, would be essentially like rappelled down, and then they use these big metal knives, cut out all of the plastic, and then they're repelled back out. And you have to do that multiple times because once the plastic wraps up, those discs don't sort the cardboard and paper because everything goes over the plastic. So contamination is one reason to sort recyclables properly. And the second is that it's important to recycle well to ensure the other direction, that we're not ending up with lots of recyclables that are going into the garbage. We want to ensure we're capturing as many recyclables as we can. We get rid of a lot of stuff. Our first goal is to reduce that amount. I'm sure you've all heard reduce, reuse, recycle. There's really a reason they're in that order. You want to reduce first, and then reuse what you can, and then recycle what's left at the very end. Although recycling is definitely better than throwing something away that could have been recycled. So it's better to do that than just saying, forget it, we're throwing it away. It still takes a ton of energy, as you saw, to go through the recycling process for collection, for sorting, for shipping it to a market, for turning it into something new and starting over. And if you can avoid all of that and just reduce or reuse, then that's a win-win. So after we've reduced what we can, when we have something that we have to get rid of, then it's important to recycle if that's an option. And I know there's lots of numbers out there that are hard to kind of wrap your head around, how much stuff there is and how many tons there are and how many swimming pools it would fill. But for one other example on how much we use and get rid of, in the US, we dispose of 2 million plastic bottles every 5 seconds, which is absolutely insane and doesn't sound possible. Some of the numbers for other things like plastic bags and otherwise get even more terrifying, so we're not going to go there. But the moral of the story is that we get rid of a lot of stuff. And now in this example, for the plastic bottles, those aren't all getting recycled, and it would make a big difference if it was all recycled. But even more important is just from the obvious scale of it, reducing that overall amount so we get rid of and use less and have way less of an environmental impact as part of that. So how do we go about changing those behaviors? This is where I really spend my time developing studies and programs to learn about what's effective with recycling education and what gets me excited when we're talking about recycling. The main goal of recycling programs that are put in place is ultimately behavior change. We want people to reduce their waste and then recycle the rest, like we just said. It's not as simple as just education. That was something that took me a while to figure out first starting in the industry. I can ask people at an event or on a tour or pretty much anywhere if they think recycling is good, and almost everyone would agree, but that doesn't mean that they all do a good job. It doesn't mean that I always do a perfect job. So the challenge is addressing that. And often that comes down to reducing barriers that someone has to an activity, or in this case, recycling. An extreme example of this would be at a multifamily property. So there's kind of a blurry image up there. You can see the illustration where there's garbage and recycling containers together at each corner of the property. And if someone knows what to recycle, they are more likely to do that if there's a recycling dumpster next to a garbage dumpster, as it's equally easy. However, say if there was only one recycling container at one corner of their property, or if the recycling was only across the street for some reason, way less people are likely to take that extra effort to find the recycling or go ask the property manager where it's at instead of just going to the dumpster. So that's an extreme example of a barrier, but that really plays a large role in determining what people do. People generally go after the easy route. So we try to make recycling obvious and easy and try to do that with reusing as well. And I know I said that education isn't everything, but it's still very important to remind people of what to do. And when we do that, we really try to keep it simple. It's extremely tempting, and there's been lots of examples of this in the past, to put 40 or 50 things on a flyer or a pamphlet that you'd like someone to do, but that's really overwhelming, and oftentimes people will do 0 things as a result, so it's not very helpful. So instead, what we try to do is really keep messaging simple. And in this example, our main core messages were just recycle clean bottles, cans, and paper, keep out food and liquids, and don't use plastic bags. So trying to keep it as straightforward as possible. And there's a few more things, and in a perfect world, I would also want people to do. But even if they only did those 3 things, we'd be in a much better spot from a recycling world than what we're currently in. So it's trying to manage the balance between best case and can we get people to do 90% of the things really well. Just about there. So also, I guess don't assume that you know the barriers that an audience has. Maybe they're well educated about what to do, but they don't have access to recycling, so it doesn't really matter how educated they are. Or maybe they don't understand the value of recycling. Or say in my case, going to school, maybe you move from out of the area and it was never an option before, so you're not even sure of how the program functions or what's even happening there. And to find those things out, it can often take research and conducting studies, which isn't quite as straightforward and takes more time, but it's kind of like the scientific method where you have to have a hypothesis, test it out, and go back to the drawing board and really try to figure out what's happening. So I won't get into all the details, but these images are recyclables. On the right, we're from a Spanish-speaking community that were created by the local community, along with some poetry and some other artwork, which was a really cool campaign. And all of that was set up as part of a study looking at how to make recycling more relevant to that group. So not just assuming that the flyers we mailed were like going to do it, but trying to make things more relevant and connected as much as we could. And then lastly, when making a connection with an audience, we try to be relatable, direct, and grab attention. An example of a campaign for this was around food waste reduction, where instead of just asking people to waste less food, we wanted to create a guide sheet using the images of a kitchen to tell people where and how to store their food to make it last longer. And we had recipes put together for how to use foods that are past their prime. And at actually 3 farmers markets even had a chef give cooking demos to demonstrate how something that seems like it's too old or too stale can really be delicious still. So again, just like in the recycling example, there isn't anyone out there who's intentionally wasting their food and saying like, I just want to buy food and throw it away. But we want to make it as easy and connect as many of those dots as we can so that the steps can actually be taken to help reduce it. Carolyn and I are happy to answer any questions, and we'll get there really quick. But I first wanted to give a brief overview of the different careers and employment opportunities that exist in the waste and recycling industry. This is just a quick snapshot on the screen of some different options. When I was in college in an environmental field, even then, I had not been aware that so many of these existed. It's easy to think that it's just the trucks and the drivers picking things up. They get hauled away and something happens, but it seems like that's about all there is. But from policy to education to project implementation, communication, media efforts, there are tons of different roles. And those can be working as part of a city or county, as part of the state, as Carolyn is, at a waste hauler, as I am, and nonprofit groups as well. So there's really tons of options out there, to where I encourage you, like something like the Washington State Recycling Association is great because you get people from all of these different works participating and engaged. Yeah, so stay interested. That's my main thing. And for contact information for Carolyn and I is on the screen, and are happy to answer any questions as well as far as the employment pieces and different options within the industry or anything we cover. So kind of like before, you're welcome to unmute yourself, or if you want to type something in the chat, we can address it like that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. That was an awesome overview. Yeah, I'm glad you spared us of the smells of a material recovery facility. Although yeah. I would recommend it to anyone. It's kind of mind blowing.
Highly recommend the tour if you have a chance, but walking by some milk carton bales is always an experience. Any questions for Carolyn or I?
It looks like we do have one question from Nina on when does Senate Bill 5022 go into effect? And I feel like I see so much foam coming out of the to-go restaurant services. And yeah, Nina, to answer your question, let's see, so 5022, it comes into effect in phases. Actually, I'll share this web page from Ecology in the chat to directly answer your question about styrofoam. Their packing peanuts will begin to be, let's see. In fact, hello. I'll share my screen so that it's in case for the folks who are a little bit more visually inclined. So this is Ecology's webpage to break down Senate Bill 5022 and how otherwise known as the plastics law. For expanded polystyrene, in 2023, packing peanuts and other packaging that's polystyrene based will be banned. In 2024, these styrofoam products will be banned. So that's going to be a lot of that to-go container styrofoam. And then there's also some exempted items. It makes like with these laws, they're pretty dense, and there's a lot of folks who advocate for like, well, what about the styrofoam that keeps medicine cold, or what about portable coolers and other things? We won't get into the details of all of that, but I wanted to share that. And then another phase that is another part of that Senate bill is being enacted now with the single-use serviceware law, which again started January 2022.
Thank you.
Catherine, it looked like had a question about TerraCycle that pays people to recycle and how that seems like a good idea, but wondering if there's a catch involved and they take things such as toothpaste tubes and toys that would normally end up in the garbage. Want to take that, Carolyn, or
Ooh.
I can as well. There's not a big catch as far as that. It shouldn't be that they're ending up with your credit card information or something like that, or in the scam in that sense.
The question I was wondering about, if it's okay if I just speak out loud.
Yeah.
Is they pay, if I looked at it right, they pay like $1 per pound of stuff that you bring in. Like so you gather all your toothpaste tubes and gather your toys that you want to get rid of. And I'm just wondering, like, what are they using all of these items for? Like, what are they becoming? And are they truly being recycled? Like, and how can they afford to do that was the thing that I was struggling with.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's one that many people have shared in the recycling industry. How does TerraCycle do this? Where are their markets? Who are they working with to process these things? And how do they do it in an efficient way that's affordable? And TerraCycle has received some eyebrow raises and skepticism. But I recently read an article where they were discussing this, and they, I think, yeah, and so I guess a big part of the answer is that they do not have transparency when it comes to their end markets, because there are basically trade secrets on how they can efficiently do this. Gosh, what else? Joel, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not a whole lot. I think a lot of that comes back to, it can be hard with things like a toothpaste tube, but in general, just reducing where we can and trying to limit some of that is the ultimate answer in all of these scenarios. So that's generally where I would try to point you. The second part I would say is that in general, if it's something like this and they're going to be doing something with it, and they're not just say dumping it, because if they're paying to dispose of it somewhere else, it doesn't make any sense for them to pay you, take something and ship it across the country and then landfill it or do something even worse with it or that type of thing. So I can say, just from a financial standpoint, I'd be confident that there's nothing awful happening, but to Carolyn's point, don't have a ton of transparency about where things go and where it ends up. And then the very last thing on that I'll say is that still the number one things ending up in the landfill locally are paper and cardboard and a lot of the basic recyclables that we have markets for and have had markets for going back 20, 30 years. And they've been our core recycling pieces. And it can be really easy to get to focus on, like, oh, I'm a great recycler. I do all the basics and I still have, my bottle caps or these toothpaste tubes or floss containers or whatever it might be. And I would just say in general, as long as you're not like buying stuff in bulk just to throw it away, you're still going to be doing really well. And as far as the stuff going to a landfill, that's such a tiny, tiny overall amount. Not that it's not good to focus on that, but there's still so many things that, like toilet paper rolls and paper towel rolls, that commonly don't end up in the recycling, but we know exactly where they're going and those types of things. So it's kind of focusing on the basics and making sure we're capturing all of the paper and all of the cans and the bottles before we worry too much about the rest, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's a great question.
It is, and it gets at, again, the complex web of recycling. And I guess in these last few minutes, a couple of things I want to mention, in the space of forward thinking, is that as Joel emphasized, reduction is the most powerful way to make an impact or to reduce our environmental impact. And I encourage you all to think more creatively about how we can further reduction of our consumption in our society. It's not a profit-oriented avenue to go down, so it's not the easy option. So there's a huge need for more reduction, more strategic ways to reduce. And the other thing I want to leave you with, part of what really inspires me to be in this industry as an environmentalist, is that I really see that the solid waste, the materials we produce and how we discard them is at such a core and obvious intersection with our daily habits. So the environmental impact and the waste we produce being at this intersection. And that's where I really see myself to make a difference, in that impact. There's so many ways to help the environment, and I'm excited that all of you in this room are really engaged in this work in some way. So, follow what speaks to you. Yeah.
Second that. Any last minute questions right before we run out of time? Okay, well, thank you for being here and listening to us, and hopefully that was helpful.
And thank you, Carolyn, Joel, for joining us and sharing your great expertise, experience, stories. We really appreciate it. And